Hi, this is Dr. Kaylee Dubois, and welcome to this episode of Sex. Tonight, we're going to talk about toxic relationships with women and when to divorce. Here's the uncomfortable reality: toxic relationships don't always leave visible scars. Sometimes the damage is done in whispers, manipulations, and emotional landmines that blow up a man's sense of self worth. And yet, no one wants to talk about it. Why? Because men are taught to man up, to stay quiet, to carry the weight in silence, even when the weight is crushing their spirit. Let's talk about what no one wants to admit: the constant criticisms that turn every conversation into an attack on your worth, the gaslighting that makes you question your memory, your reality, and even your sanity, the financial control, women who bleed men dry, maxing out credit cards, then calling themselves selfish, calling you selfish when they are told no. The public humiliation, the subtle digs, and outright insults disguised as jokes in front of friends and family. And then let's talk about the sexual manipulation, withholding intimacy as a weapon to punish or to control. Now, here's the kicker: when men finally hit their breaking point, when they try to speak out, they're met with shame and disbelief. Society calls them weak. Other men tell them to suck it up. And women, some laugh it off, calling it a man's problem, or worse, deny it ever happened. So tonight we're going to talk about these things. We have special guests on the show. We have a caller who's been through a tremendous amount of shit. And we're going to get him on. We're going to talk about his story. We have a really great hypnotherapist that's based out of Phoenix, James Junta, who was Hypnotist of the Year, has been on TED Talks, and has helped thousands of people gain control over their life and give them solutions. So thank you guys for coming on the show. Now, I want to tell you guys a story before we begin. And it's a story about a very close friend of mine. Now, I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, and most of my friends were farm kids. I had a friend that went off to school, became a rocket scientist, and he ended up working for Boeing in Utah. He was a Lutheran, so he was raised in a Lutheran church, believed in marriage, had values. When he was in Utah, he met a Mormon, very common because that's what Utah is known for, right? That community base there. He ends up asking her to marry him on Christmas Day. He had the ring wrapped in this beautiful, golden wrapper. He said he spent lots of money on this ring, wanted to surprise this woman. She opens it and she says no, because he's not Mormon. He has to convert. So he converts to Mormonism for this woman. Well, Boeing, if you guys are not familiar with Boeing, but back in the 90s, they laid off a bunch of people, and he was one of them. So he was married, he had converted Mormonism, so he was looking for a new job. So he ends up back in Iowa working for John Deere as a patent engineer. And he says to his beautiful wife, who he'd been married to for a year, well, what would you like? We can buy a house. We can do anything. She goes, well, build me a house. And he goes, well, okay. So he buys 3 acres of land on a lake outside of Waterloo, Iowa, right? And he builds her this 3,000 square foot home. He's his own general contractor. I mean, he grew up on a farm. That's what we do when we're from the Midwest. We do things like that. And so he builds her this beautiful house, this 3,000 square foot home, puts in all the siding, the electrical, everything himself, busts his ass. 3 months after the project is complete, they're moved in. He's at work. He gets a phone call from the neighbor. He gets a phone call from his neighbor that says, hey, you got a moving truck. What's going on? They're moving out all your stuff. And he goes, what? Now, understand that he bought a house about 30 minutes outside of town. in a new subdevelopment. So he has to now leave his cubicle, jump into his truck, drive all the way to the subdevelopment. And by the time he gets there, he opens the door and the entire house has been gutted. Gutted. Okay? Everything but his clothing and a fucking post-it note. He had to hire a private investigator to find his wife. He had never once hit her. And I truly believe him. This is a very good friend of mine. Never once hit her. He had to hire a PI. So she wants a divorce. He ends up losing everything. Now, this is the early 90s. It's like 1991. So to recoup the expenses, he ends up living in a mobile home, working as a patent engineer. And the mobile home's full of black mold. And he starts getting really sick, right? And he doesn't know why. So he goes to the doctor misdiagnoses him and says, you have HIV. So he believes he has HIV for like 2 months, right? Until he gets a second opinion. Finds out he doesn't have HIV. Okay? And he now has never had a good, trusting relationship with a woman. This happened in the 90s. So now he has an autoimmune condition. So we're talking about collateral damage. We're not talking just about the concept of a woman ruining your life. We're talking about a man's health that went to shit because he had to recoup from this major loss. These are the stories I hear on a daily basis. For 20 some years, I've heard story after story of people's lives being wrecked. James, and I'm going to say it, you're a great friend of mine. You told me something that broke my heart about 8 months ago. You said to me in private, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, you were dating a woman, and she wanted to know how much money you made so she could be taken care of. And I said, James, you're like divorced, you're in your 60s, you're retired. Like, this woman, how old is she? You're like, well, she's in her 60s too. And I go, why is she expecting you to financially take care of her? You've only been dating just a handful of weeks. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show. It's not only do you do inner game and you are a wonderful, amazing man, but you have been through so much with women. And that touched a point with me where I was like, what is going on in our culture? Why is this person expecting someone she does not know to financially take care of her? I also had a good friend, and he was on the show last time, owns a bunch of AI companies. A woman he was on a date with recently wanted to see what was inside his checking account to know if she wanted to date him or not. I mean, he lives down in West Palm Beach. He means a fucking millionaire, but he's like, get the fuck out of here. I can't have a relationship with a woman who's asking me to show my checking and savings accounts. So, what's going on, James, in our culture? What's really happening here?
Well, from what you just said, these are boundaryless conversations, lack of respect. And frankly, on the part of some people, lack of self-respect and self-love to be putting up with it. In brief.
Self-love, the lack of self-love and self-respect. So now I have a caller on the air, and, Ryan, I know you've been through some things in life, and it'd be really interesting to hear your story. If you could share it with those that are watching tonight.
Okay. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay. Several years back, met a girl online, got together. We were together for a couple years. But at one point, before we were ever intimate, each time I asked her, have you been taking your pills, meaning birth control? Have you been taking? Yes, 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 yes. Well, in about 2 months toward the end of the relationship, I had found a pregnancy test in her car. It was negative. We talked about it, and she said that she had stopped taking her pills 2 months earlier. And I got real upset and talked to her some more, and she said that she was already picking out baby names, thinking about a wedding, and that right there was really kind of I could see the end coming. She hit me a lot. Um, I'm a bigger guy, so she'd always comment on my weight. Um, and I think the lowest point was she withheld sex for several months until I got circumcised. She didn't like that I was intact. But at the time, I was in a real bad place, so I went through with it. I did it um, because I have a girlfriend. That's I was do anything to hold on to a girlfriend. And when I found out the pregnancy test, that pretty much ended it. And I left the relationship with a pregnancy scare, a circumcision, and having been, I guess, victim of domestic violence. We can call it that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Um, During this time with this woman, let's go all the way back in time. What messages in culture and society, Ryan, did you hear growing up about staying in relationship with a girl? Like, what things did you believe as far as, keeping you in of that kind of prison?
I had always been taught, and it really kind of sticks today, at least with my family, that you got a girl pregnant, then you marry her, and that's it. But I, as much as I liked her, at one point I thought about marrying her, but this situation just really opened my eyes. For growing up, it was take care of a woman, do what you need to do, take care of your family, man up. You know, your job doesn't have to be happy. Just run through it and do a good job with whatever you're doing. Um, and that's really kind of what I always heard. Like, if you find a woman, stick with her, regardless.
James, what values did you grow up around with women?
I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Ryan, how did the relationship end?
The the pregnancy scare that really it opened my eyes, and I just said, you need to leave. And for the next couple of weeks, she'd try and call or stop by my place, but I just cut her off.
I acknowledge you for ending the relationship. Good man.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, were there any times in the past when you tried to end the relationship and she forced you back into it?
A couple times as I was trying to get away from her, her she just I don't know what her words were, but she decided to she would become every sexual fantasy I ever had. And she'd use that to try to get me to come back and come back. And I just said, no, no, this is, I don't care how exciting she is now. It's too late.
So she was using sex as a manipulative tool to keep you within the relationship as well. That's very interesting. What about, was there any other person involved? Did she ever cheat on you? Did she ever lie to you about cheating on you?
No. And I asked her later on if anything happened outside of the relationship, and she said there wasn't. But, and I want to believe her because I didn't have any proof otherwise.
Mhm. How often were the attacks, like the physical attacks?
2 or 3 times a week. Um, yeah, 2 or 3 times a week it would happen.
Were there police involvement? You know, phone calls to the
No,
police? No.
no, no.
Yeah.
I I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. See, this is what I'm talking about. Every time I interview a man who has experienced assault, even sexual assault, they never report. They never report. And then statistical data is all misconstrued because we don't have the evidence to say women are just as much at fault as men are in physical violence. sexual violence. You know? And this is one of my primary issues is how can we actually know what's going on behind closed doors to help people, to give them that strength, that confidence to move forward and get out of the divorce, or just separate, if you're not married, just separate, move on. And here's the thing with hypnosis, James, is every time this, we teach this in seduction and pickup arts, every time you pull away, you're creating a fractionated state. So when they come back, they're in a deeper trance. And the whole fallacy of the sunken cost fallacy of I'm going to put more effort into this relationship and perhaps something else will bloom, and it just doesn't. And by the time you realize you're 6 years into a marriage or a relationship and you just feel completely fucked. You're like, fuck. And it's the sunken cost fallacy that we're seeing consistently. It's the fractionated states, right? And your abuse becomes normalized because we live in a society that gives messages to men to man up, to be stoic. Don't have emotions, bottle them up, be passive aggressive. Well, how else are you going to deal with the emotions? I was just on the phone with a friend. He said, well, my grandpa loved to drink and his wife would just nag him, hey, don't spend our money on the booze. He'd go, okay, yes, ma'am. And then where would he be? He'd be at the bar spending the money on the booze. Passive aggressively. Why? Because that's how men are taught to process their emotions, because they're taught to bottle it all up and then they explode and then they wonder why. Men explode and go postal because they go home to a berating wife that has been denying them sex, that points the finger and says it's all your fault and doesn't want to take responsibility, abdicates their responsibility. I mean, think about it. Generations have been taught to believe a lie that a man's going to take care of them, right? You guys all understand the dowry principle, right? Like what happened when you married a woman 100 years ago, you've received her dowry. A woman takes a man's last name in order for that man to take care of her. She is now indebted. He owes all the debts to her. He takes her debt. That's what marriage was for. It was a legal contract in order to take care of another human being because women weren't thought to be their own adult-like self. So these messages, I believe, are hereditary. This sounds really kind of strange. They're brought down through a line, a family cycle, right? And it doesn't matter if we're in 2024. If your mother was born in the 60s, 50s, 40s, and she gives her daughter the messages that men need to provide financially, then that, especially from ages birth to 7, she's a sponge, absorbing all this information of what her parents, her mother, the women in her family unit fed her. Disney movies. So let me ask you this. Ryan, did you ever get to meet her mom?
Yes.
What was her mom like?
Very outgoing. I don't want to say loud, but she didn't hold anything back. Very nice, very pleasant lady. Always enjoyed seeing me. I liked seeing her, but you knew she was in the room.
You knew that she was in the room. Okay, so she had to be seen. So what was her relationship like with her husband? Was she married? The mom?
Divorced.
Divorced. So you never got to meet the dad?
I met the dad, yeah. The girl I was with went back and forth between one parent and the other. And I could see her manipulating and getting money out of both of them.
Okay.
And she got whatever she wanted from either of them. I guess the whole guilt of having a child out of divorce or that type of thing. So she always got what she wanted when she was home. And yeah.
Interesting. So your ex was able to weaponize her parents' divorce in order to, you know, garnish as much money as she could out of her parents.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. So, James, do you have any questions for Mark? I mean, Ryan?
Ryan.
Ryan?
I do not have a question, but I'm observing and comparing, of course, without any judgment, and just assessing. And I appreciate what Ryan you had to say about societal pressures and how your belief system caused you to stay in there, even though it was dangerous and unpleasant. I do want to say that it seems to me that all relationships are transactional. We give something, we get something. At some point, our belief system and through conditioning, we're likely to stay in a relationship, even if not we're not getting what we want and need, and that'll go along for a certain amount of time. I wonder if it's more likely for some types of personalities to stay in a bad relationship than others. Ryan, in your case, you got out of it, but think of how many men there are who are still staying in their relationships and being abused.
Yeah, it's
That's very interesting. What personalities do you think stay in the relationships? Can you identify them, James? What do you think?
I don't know how to identify them. But when I deal with clients on a one-to-one basis, I'm able to identify what happened in their early lives that caused certain beliefs. For example, in my own case, there was something that happened between my parents. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. I recalled it in a hypnosis session when I was being hypnotized. But the thing that happened to me was my parents were having a fight. My father said, "You know what? I'm going to go into the city and you'll never see me again." And it was so scary to me that I instantly adopted the idea that the man must never leave. And so many years later, decades later, when I was asking for a divorce, I felt guilty because the man isn't supposed to leave. So I was in a real bind.
That's really interesting. There's a methodology called re-imprinting in neurolinguistic programming that allows you to re-imprint with resources at those early stage years when you're observing your parents. And this is really interesting. The models, the representations that your parents give you when you're in such a young state of mind, impressionable mind, you hallucinate what it means. Just like in James' case, you're like, he's gone forever. I have a very similar story. My parents had a domestic assault. I did not know. Mom disappeared for a week. Grandfather was chief of police, PD. He made us go knocking on doors looking for mom. I thought mom was never going to return. I mean, trauma. I just thought about that. I was like, "Oh, this is insane." You know? Why would you have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old knocking on doors? Mommy there? You know? But they do that. They think that's the right. I mean that was the 80s, but they thought he thought it was the right thing to do. Because he wanted to make my mom feel ashamed for leaving a domestic assault. So it's interesting to me. Re-imprinting is a really interesting concept. Do you know that? You know what I'm talking about, James, right? Re-imprinting?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. When you've been in a relationship that is so toxic, the moment you look in the mirror, you wonder when you stopped recognizing the person staring back. Am I the only person who has gained weight, felt ugly, felt disenfranchised after being with someone that has been completely toxic for years? I was married to someone. I left him. I had put on 50 pounds in the marriage, not to abdicate the responsibility to go out and work out. Okay? I was very young. I had put on 50 pounds in that marriage. One, I didn't want him to touch me. I was tired of him. I had a lot of resentments. Two, like I didn't really, at the time didn't think about, said, well, this is it, like I guess I can eat candy every day and, cookies. I let myself go. I was in my early 20s. By the time I left him, I moved all the way to the backwoods of Oregon to train with Dr. John LaTourette in martial arts. And I get into the dojo and he looks at me. He's like, God, you got fat. I said, well, I'm divorcing. I'm getting divorced. He goes, good. So when is, and this is something that I want to talk about. When is the right when is the right time to walk away? When is the right time to walk away? What is the threshold that someone has to pass in order to say, fuck this, I am done? I can tell you what threshold I went through when I packed up my car and said goodbye to my husband and moved to the backwoods of Oregon. But what was your threshold, James? Do you mind sharing your threshold pattern?
I don't mind sharing, but I must say at the outset that I have not been in a relationship that was that abusive or that intolerable.
Okay.
So in my case, the woman that I left in the case of my marriage was a woman who I could still see as a worthy person.
Okay.
So a worthwhile person deserving of love. So that's a lot different than an abuser. It's the person will leave at the point that the abuser stops being a real person and more like a demon and somebody who's not even worth compassion or patience or love or anything.
And I think
That's
that is to be
that's the
said
breaking
too.
point.
I think that is to be said too about just divorcing in general. What is the threshold pattern for divorce? What makes a person decide to get divorced? How many things have to get stacked as a disadvantage? Johnny Saporno, who is a men's inner game guru, I spoke with him many times. He once told me that men need another woman in order to leave. He was convinced. He had worked with thousands of men on inner game, and he was convinced that most of the men that decide to get divorced, there's another woman involved. And I said, it's really interesting. I go, where does this thread, if we were to pull the thread back, where does this thread come from? Like, why do men generate their sense of value by having a woman in their life? I've heard this through constant conversations. And this is why I have maybe some people who can give me an idea of why these threads are so common. What validates a man's sense of worth more than a woman on his arm? A good-looking woman. Okay, why? Why is there not a more intrinsic value that men can have? So when they are being condemned, when they are having sex used as a manipulative tool against them, when their finances have been bled dry, why are these things happening? Why are we choosing as a culture and society to say, hey, your value is in another person, you better hook up with them and have a relationship and be seen as someone that is successful because you have a woman on your arm? Why is this? Why is
Well,
this?
you mentioned it earlier: societal norms, societal pressures, upbringing, certain behaviors that get normalized, and we see them that way. But I do want to say, and as we all know, there are subcultures within our society in which you can immerse yourself and find support for any of a number of behaviors, even aberrant behaviors. That you can find your people who will support you and validate that yes, you deserve better. You deserve to be loved and treated nicely.
Right. That's one of the things we do here at the Institute of Hypnosis and Sexuality for the last 20 years, giving the concepts of you can live your own paradigm. So you don't have to, you can question the realities that you live in. So what about questioning realities? Is there any questions that people can ask themselves, any kind of trance they can put themselves in, James, to have them question the reality?
I'm so glad you asked. So here's how it works for me in my practice with my clients. You can check in with yourself. There's going to be a physical sensation or an emotion or a thought, something that will come up whenever danger or vulnerability is present, when you're not being treated well. There's going to be something. If you can stop or take yourself out of the situation and just check in with yourself, your body will tell you. Your emotions will let you know. Your thoughts. And if you have any sense of spirituality, that's a good time to get in touch with your higher power and just ask. But so to answer your question, Kaylee, the way I work, in my opinion, the inner self knows the truth. You just need to separate yourself from what's going on in order to really hear it, communicate with it.
So the inner self knows the truth. Have you heard of the hypervagal theory?
You're about to tell us.
No, the hypovagal theory, the vagus nerve.
Yes,
The vagus nerve runs up and down the midline of the body into the stomach, right? And that's like the gut reaction, that gut feeling, right?
yes.
Um, Here's the interesting thing: the research done on that. Like, if you are a dog, and let's say you're a puppy dog, I love puppy dogs, and you, since being born, you get kicked every day. You start to normalize kicking, right? Same thing goes for humans. So the vagus nerve starts to go, oh, that's normal. I'm going to get kicked every day, right? So it does. The people, this is why people don't trust themselves. They don't trust themselves. There was a class led by Donna Eden, who wrote the book Energy Medicine, and it was recently, and she was talking about the vagus nerve, and like tuning into your own. She called it her psychic antenna. I was like, okay, they're really into psychic skills development. I'm not here to say what is right, what is wrong, and what is in science fiction or reality. Um, but there is research on the vagus nerve being that gut reaction, that very visceral reaction. So your method of checking in, to me, if I were to dissect that, I think of perceptual positions, first, second, third, meta, right? Sorry, I go really into detail. And then checking out and being able to go, okay, well, I've experienced for 7 years just this person consistently berating me. I normalized it. My sympathetic nervous system is always on because I know the moment I walk through the door, I'm going to get bitched at. The kids are going to be screaming. There's going to be dirty dishes and laundry that needs to be folded. And, the things that most men are not allowed to talk about. Oh, by the way, because if they talk about it, they are dismissed by their partner. I take care of the kids, blah, 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 everything I've heard. So when they're doing perceptual positions and they're moving into a second position and they see themselves out there and they begin to feel what is right, or they feel a sensation in their body. I think this goes back, James, this is a really good point. I'm just trying to break it down into more of a science. It's a really good point. What about when men lose their ability to get an erection with their wife? Would that be the same response?
I believe it is. And you mentioned something in your own experience when you went back to martial arts training, you were training the body. That has an enormous effect on the emotions and the
Oh
thoughts.
yeah,
You were literally gaining more power in your life.
yes, most definitely. I was definitely gaining more power. And I would say that I was developing my proprioceptive, so like my spatial awareness, and being able to focus on like movement in space, because we used to do a lot of mass attacks and stuff like that. Empowerment is a really interesting thing, empowerment. And with all these messages that are bombarded with men, I'm a woman, okay? I can't speak for you guys. I can speak at you. But my question is really, what kind of, if you could have like the most perfect world for men, like after you guys know so much already, like about psychological manipulative techniques used on you that almost every woman does. If you could have a perfect society, let's say we could have a utopian, what would that look like? I know it sounds kind of crazy, but what is the future of relationships if it could just be like an ideal connection between a man and a woman from a man's perspective?
From a man's perspective, and I hate to go back to this old stereotype, but men are really simple. What do we really need? Great sex, good food, security, knowing that the relationship is going to survive and we're okay with each other. Men are really simple. Satisfy those few things and a man will stay for a long, long time.
Yeah, great sex.
When Ryan mentioned earlier that his ex-girlfriend was trying to manipulate him with sex and she would become every fantasy that he ever wanted, that was exciting to me when I heard that. I can be manipulated very easily by sex.
Interesting.
Sure.
Ryan, what about you? If you could have a perfect utopian, and what would the relationships be like between men and women?
Um, I don't want to sound corny, but open, honest, give and take. Establish what your role is in the relationship and what your willing to do and not do. There's no conflict. And I wanted to add on to what he just said about things men need. Men need a sense of purpose. That's why, like, men commit suicide when they lose their job. Having a sense of purpose, even within a relationship, holds a lot of value.
Men need a sense of purpose. Let's expand on this. So how can we remove a man's sense of success defined by a woman in his life? What would you guys tell other men? How can a man feel successful without having
I go through this all the time with my clients. The way to do that is really we are really separate. So this is one thing that abusive relationships do. They lose the boundaries and loss of sense of self. So regaining those boundaries, I am me, she is who she is. I am responsible for how I'm reacting to her. So she does what she does and I react the way I react. There doesn't have to be a connection between the two. Now, if there is a deep connection between the two, that's codependency or enmeshment. So you want to first separate that she does what she does, but I react the way I react, and it's my choice to react the way I react. If somebody's giving me information or trying to manipulate me, my response could be message received. Thank you. Got it. It doesn't have to be me doing anything or responding anyway or moving toward or moving away. She does what she does. I can react any way that I want to react, and it's going to be okay.
Beautiful.
See, here's the thing. I trust. So in all my experiences in relationships and having been divorced, I learned to trust me. And my superpower is discernment. I'm going to know if I'm being manipulated or screwed over. So therefore, I don't really need to trust anybody else. It doesn't even really come up because I trust me.
Beautiful. Can you teach us how to trust ourselves?
Say again?
What it was. Okay. Can you hear me? Someone's speaker is too close to their mic. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, beautiful.
I can hear you.
So, how does one learn to trust themselves? If you could give us a step by step, if you could give us a takeaway here, some gift for the holiday season, how can we start trusting ourselves?
Okay, well, most people have that experience, but sometimes it goes way back. I would simply ask somebody to think about an achievement that you have or an accomplishment, something that you did that was really, really hard. And maybe you had some doubt that you could do it, but you did do it and you did achieve it. That's evidence that your inner voice was correct and true because you followed it and you succeeded. That's one way. But I have had clients who tell me that they've never had that experience. They've never been happy. They've never felt secure in their environment. I doubt that that's true, but people have told me. So in that case, we have to invent it. The person must invent it as if it's never existed before. What it would be like if I had the true voice that I can trust. And having a spiritual connection or a spiritual awareness is very helpful in this case. But listening to true north, the true direction that you have, if you haven't ever experienced it in the past, even for a second, then you'll need to invent it, create it, have it. Another good way is to look at any, not to idealize or idolize anyone, but to look at another example, another human who seems to be trusting themselves and to model that behavior.
So, how important is trust in oneself? How important is that?
I think it's the basis of all happiness, success. It's surprising that some people, it doesn't even come up for a lot of people, what trusting in the self is. I meet some people sometimes who have never struggled. So for them, possibly if they've never had to consider, do I trust myself? Do I love myself? do I forgive myself? Most people are going to have some kind of a struggle where these issues are going to come up, and you'll decide for yourself. And when I ask people, do you love yourself? Sometimes people will say sometimes or mostly. Some people will think about it and say, no, I don't love myself. So in those cases, we're going to have to move the bar really low and start very fundamentally. This is what loving yourself looks like. Here's what trust is. Very fundamental lessons.
Self-trust. What about, is there a microphone that's real close to a speaker? Okay, that's all right. We're having an echo. So let's talk about deservedness, because what I hear in conversations with men is that they're in these terrible relationships, but yet, like I said, they keep giving and giving and giving and getting nothing in return. So, how can we get men to understand that it is their inherent right to have great sex and great sex, emotionally connected sex, and intimacy, that they don't have to, wine, dine, the whole, 9 yards in order to actually receive it and own it? That's how can we get them to understand that they deserve it? They don't need to lose 100 pounds. They don't need to have excuses like, when I get the car, then I can find the girl, or I need a better job, or whatever the excuses are. How can we make men, generalized, feel as though, or knowing, trusting self, that they deserve, spiritual intimacy? I mean, how can we, what can we say to them? You know, I mean, I have yet to figure this out. Like, I have yet to figure out how to get men to understand they deserve that. What do you think?
Men don't get these lessons. There isn't a handbook of how to be a man. Some men can teach it, and in some cultures, men are very good at teaching the young ones as they're growing older. But for the most part, and the men who I know who have been in trouble did not get those simple lessons in the very beginning. So for those men, I would suggest a support group or a professional to help them lead the way. They're going to need, and men aren't conditioned to take lessons from other men. We're conditioned to know everything. And if we don't know everything, we're supposed to pretend that we know everything, or else we're going to seem vulnerable and somebody will take advantage of us. So men in that position aren't going to reveal much. And you see them all the time in public. They're not revealing much in terms of facial expression or self-expression of any kind. They're not responsive, don't say a lot because they're afraid. They don't want to reveal what they're feeling because they're afraid somebody will take advantage of them. So for men who are in that position, who are stuck, I would recommend a support group or a professional to help lead the way.
Do you offer support groups down in Phoenix?
I do. And I will work with men of any ages. I'm getting a lot of men over 50. But I also enjoy working with younger men, early 20s, early 30s, who are having relationship problems, and they really need some kind of a grounding, something, to moor the ship so that they can, so they can be okay in who they are and what they want and how to get it and how to know whether they're getting it or not, or if this is the right situation for them.
Beautiful.
So when a man is in that position and they're thinking this is not a good relationship for me, it's going to take a little time to assess and determine. And I love what Ryan said earlier, that man needs a sense of purpose, not just in life, but in the relationship, to know what his role is. Ryan, that was excellent.
So,
Thank you.
Ryan, let's go back to a sense of purpose. How to define a sense of purpose in a relationship. So, when I think of purpose, like, purpose can have many different facets to it: the emotional purpose, the financial purpose. It can have all different kinds of interlays of we can go meta upon meta of what purpose means. So, how does one communicate that to their sexual partners, their lovers, their wives, their girlfriends? How can a man say, well, what's my purpose in this relationship? In BDSM, we have like roles, we have identity roles, which I think are pretty silly. Label jars, not people, right? I think that we're all a mix of just something and we're all going to grow and evolve, right? Like one moment I could be like, oh man, I'm a switch. The next it could be a dom. I don't believe in any of that, right? What I do believe is that there can be purpose, but this dialogue needs to happen. So, what is purpose to you? How do you define a purpose?
I I guess I just looked and saw some things that I didn't like, and wasn't employed well at the time, so I wasn't doing anything outside of the home. Um, so I really just kind of realized one day, like, I'm not worthless. Let me contribute to my surroundings. Um, and that's, I don't know, I can't really go too much deeper, but once I got a good job, once I started helping with the relationship, doing my part, I felt better.
So, are you saying that your financial contribution made you feel like you had a purpose in the
Yeah,
relationship?
yeah. I wasn't having to depend on her or other people to pay for dinner
Okay.
or just things like that. We could go on a weekend trip, and I wasn't having to um, get money from other people. I could handle things.
Mhm.
Um, that really made me feel good.
I would imagine it did. And it's really interesting to me because a lot of men say that their purpose is to financially contribute to the relationship. But your purpose is beyond a financial contribution. Your purpose is spiritual. I mean, that's why people sign a legal contract. Well, marriage in general is supposed to be a spiritual contract between God and the partnership. But we've taken it a whole new level, with legal contracts and stuff like that. But a union, a sacred union, right? And so it's really interesting. Like, how can we get men, James, to define their purpose as something beyond the financial? You know.
Well, I think really one thing that's essential is to not have poverty. If someone is doing okay and they don't have the pressure in the first place, you can then look beyond and see, what else do I need in life? But another thing that's going on in the country and in the world right now is that so many people are not prepared financially and not doing well. It's a big distraction. Living with debt and financial insecurity will cause you to look away from what you really need just to solve that one problem.
Yeah, it's
So,
you
yeah,
gotta.
but there's another thing I wanted to mention. When I was saying getting support, I have relied on women for information about women my whole life. I grew up with powerful women. And just when I think I've got it down and I understand women so well and I'm patting myself on the back, then I need another lesson, which I got one this week from a woman who has known me for almost 40 years. We're very, very close friends. We've never been in an intimate relationship. We're just friends. But she trusted me enough to take a risk and tell me what I needed to know about my current state of affairs. And I was very grateful for the lesson. So, women, this should be a woman who loves you, a woman who you trust, who has wisdom, who you're not in a relationship with. Those women are very, very valuable to me. They give me information all the time about how to be a better man and how to be good to myself and to be good in relationships. Kaylee Dubois, excellent, excellent example of a woman who's wise. You're not in a relationship with her, and she wants to do good in the world, and she has wisdom about relationships.
It's interesting to me that you brought up the fact that poverty. There's someone's microphone is close to this is really
It's got to
important.
be me.
This is really important. Can you hear me, James?
I can hear you, but I think I'm the one with the problem, so I'm going to fix it right now
Okay.
while you're talking.
So this is really important. You brought up something about poverty. Yes, that's a bleeding neck issue. Tourniquet the fucking wound. Take care of self. Taking care of self financially, right, is key. And if you want to provide for a secondary person that is a woman, say you don't have children with her, that's fine. I mean, that's perfectly okay. Understand also that, if we look at Dilt's logical levels, we have our spiritual, we have our identity, we have our values, we have our beliefs, we have our capabilities, and then we have our environment as a pyramid. Robert Dilts, NLP University founder, was one of these old guys with Richard Bandler way back in the day. I studied, got an NLP trainer cert like 14 years ago from the guy. But he created the neurological levels. And this is, back to Bateson's logical levels, two different models. Well, basically, if we can connect the spiritual, this is why I love you so much, James. You always go for the spiritual, and the spiritual is at the top of the pyramid. And if you can fix the issue at the spiritual level, like a lot of sex methodologies do that, like Tantra and certain sacred sexual practices, they go right for the root of the issue. And once you start viewing sexuality as a spiritual definement, then it can trickle down those levels, right? So when I think about like your identity level, which is right below spiritual on the neurological levels, and I'll post it so you know what I'm talking about. Like your identity as a man in a partnership is, I think, oftentimes, like when I talk to men, they talk about financial contribution as their primary purpose to the relationship. And I'm like, what about my spiritual? What about my love? What about my love making, And this is really important to me as a woman, but I'm also a very sexual being, so I'm a little different. My stuff goes 20 years back into Tantra, so I'm always thinking about this sacred union between man and woman and the divinity of that, right? But we live in a culture that's been cut off, I think, from the spiritual aspects of life, because we're on these. We're on these. So we're disconnected from like this synchronization that is energetic. And you do something really wonderful. And I want you to share what you do with Hypnotes and bringing the person into trance through music. I mean, I didn't really we have some time left. So like sex to me and relationship is this movement. It's like a flow, it's a dance. And James produces the music to trance.
Yes. So I had an idea some years ago that based on very, very simple universal principles. One of them is that music is hypnotic. Music on its own can transcend. It causes us to feel a certain way, think a certain way. And the other idea that I had was that hypnosis actually has nothing to do with relaxation. So if you put those two ideas together, it could be any kind of music causing hypnosis with suggestions to go in a certain way. So I have a musical partner, and we play the music that isn't necessarily airy, fairy, hippy dippy, trippy music. It can be jazz, it can be up tempo and quite driving, accompanied by hypnotic suggestions. So the next one we're going to do in February is going to be date night. The theme is going to be date night. And some of the suggestions are going to be something to the effect that you're going to go home and have so much great sex tonight. So much sex.
And love and connection, right?
Yes.
Love and connection and great sex. And you wake
Yes.
up and you have a bounce in your step for a few days. Maybe that type
Yes.
of sex. Yeah, so this is, do you know what date your show is playing? And is it in Phoenix?
It's going to be in Phoenix at the ALAC Theater, downtown Phoenix. I don't have a date yet, but we do have the venue.
Date night. Well, let me know. Let me know.
It'll be on a Friday night.
So
you going to bring a date?
Bring your date. You can get hypnotized.
Are you going to bring a date, Kaylee?
Oh, man, I go solo. I date my hands. They never leave me. They never cause me grief. They never ask for money. They never belittle me the moment I walk in the door. If I want to sit and eat cheeseburgers in bed, it doesn't go, you fat bitch.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're lucky to have each other.
They know where I've been,
Yes.
They're not asking me about my numbers. They don't want to know my body count, I don't have to worry about, STDs or, wives that
Right.
call me late at night, just all of that stuff. So we're going to come to a close. I have to close you guys. I got about 3 minutes left. Is there anything you want to share? Anything?
Yeah, I'm staying. I'm not going. I'm staying.
You're staying. What
I'm
about
not.
you, Ryan? You got anything you want to share?
No.
I appreciate you
I-
coming on the show. I really do. Men need to speak up. Men need to speak up. They need to make police reports, so we can get statistical data so we can provide more counseling for men. Like addiction, this is really important. Men go to drugs and alcohol as a way to subdue the emotional states. Like like let's give them more alternatives that are healthy and driven, and also give them a concept in mind that they do deserve really great sex, they do deserve love, and they don't have to change much of anything about themselves. What they need to do is take self responsibility, like of course, like go find a way to financially provide for yourself so you got food, shelter over your head, and your basic amenities met, you know but don't allow, like if you're just a machinist, don't think that you need to go and get like a PhD, a lawyer, all that stuff, a jaguar, as a way to prevent you from actually going out and talking to women. Or don't think that you need to find another woman in order to divorce your wife. You don't need to do that. If you're in an unhappy marriage, just get over it. Move on.
Yes. I want to acknowledge Ryan again, not only for having the guts to tell us the story, but for the lessons you learned from it. Ryan, the wisdom that you came up with was wisdom that you didn't have when you were in the relationship, but you thought about the experience. You made it mean something powerful, and now you're going to be better for future relationships.
I mean, yeah, I would definitely say like your consciousness, Ryan, is much more than most men. Like you're consciously aware, and
yeah.
that's gonna like drive you further in life. Just having
I'm
that.
glad I got to hear you tonight. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great.
Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all the guys who allowed me to share their stories. I asked them each individually if I could share their stories of what have happened to them. Um, like Ray, who I spoke about earlier, who thought he had HIV, but actually has a mold issue, and lost his house and had to hire a PI to find his wife and gave her everything, even converted to Mormonism, you know, to, the men in my life, my own father, who went through a lot of domestic violence. I write about that. We were collateral as children. We,
Wow.
had really unhappy parents. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share your stories, to be a part of this, and to give you guys an open dialogue. So yes, you can speak up, and yes, you can process emotion, and you don't have to put up with the shit. So thank you so much, guys, for coming on today's episode of Sex. Again, I will post some of the Robert Dilts model so you guys can see what I was talking about, neurological levels. And also, I'll be posting James's information. So if you want to train with James, he also does this remotely. He is one of the best. He has been through a lot with women, and I highly recommend that you check him out. He's probably going to
Thank
do
you.
a Black Friday special to hook you guys up. I know that he does an initial consultation with you. I recommend him. He was Hypnotist of the Year. He works a lot with men and men going through separation and changes in their life. So, and also Hypnotes, his musical event coming up.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you guys.
Thank
I
you.
hope you have a good night, and thank you for coming on Sex.